This is CBC Vancouver News.
Could it be the beginning of the end to BC's port strike? The federal government gives the mediator 24 hours to come up with a potential deal for both sides to consider. They may look like harmless toys, but police in BC are warning about a rise in 3D printed guns.
The sense of belonging of being a Hong Konger is gradually diminishing.
Ottawa loosens requirements for Hong Kongers coming to Canada in the hopes of becoming permanent residents. Good evening, I'm Tanya Fletcher. We begin with developing news on BC's port strike. The federal government has ordered the mediator to come up with a potential deal in 24 hours. Tonight, the Labour Minister put out a statement saying the difference in the two sides' position is, quote, not sufficient to justify a continued work stoppage. He's now asking the mediator to come up with a potential deal. That news came as dozens of workers rallied on the picket lines.
Stand up! Fight back! Stand up! Fight back! What do we want? Fight back!
About 7,500 workers have been off the job for 11 days now, affecting some 30 ports, including Canada's busiest here in Vancouver. Business groups have been calling on Ottawa to bring in back-to-work legislation, and the minister's office now saying the mediator will have 24 hours to recommend a potential settlement, and then both sides will have another 24 hours to see if they agree. It comes as premiers from multiple provinces have also joined the call for the feds to step in and end the strike. The impacts are being deeply felt in many sectors, including the auto industry. As Michelle Gassoub is finding out, that could translate into higher car prices.
Day 11 of a strike at ports across BC, Canada's auto industry now warning the longer the wait for a resolution, the more backed up supply chains will get.
It's made a bad situation worse. And, unfortunately, it's a situation where nobody can give the consumer a satisfactory answer in terms of when their vehicle is actually going to arrive.
Canada imports most of its cars through Japan and South Korea, with most of them shipped through the port of Vancouver. Manufacturers are now left scrambling to find alternate routes.
Some of them are, in fact, sending ships down through the Suez, the Canal, to Texas and other places for unloading, which of course is going to significantly delay the process.
Others are putting cars and car parts on American rail cars, but that temporary solution will soon turn expensive.
But at some point, those costs do become exorbitant and do ultimately filter down to the customer level as well. So in an age where, the average new car payment currently is about $800 a month, it's only going to make that, the affordability challenge that much greater.
The automobile industry was already dealing with backlogs thanks to the pandemic and a global chip shortage. CBC News asked the province whether BC supply chains are secure in the wake of the strike and whether consumers could soon feel the impact. The province said only in a written statement, "We're continuing to strengthen our supply chain network, and we encourage both parties to urgently get back to the bargaining table to work out an end to the dispute."
Your fight is our fight.
With striking workers asking for better wages and protections still holding the line, a long wait and heftier price tags to buy a car could be in Canadians' future. Michelle Gassoub, CBC News, Vancouver.
Another round of evacuation orders and alerts to tell you about tonight, and all of them are in northern BC. The Caribou and Bulkley-Nechako regional districts issued multiple orders and alerts tonight. Officials say the situation is so fluid right now, they can't yet pinpoint exactly how many properties are affected. Overall, at least 150 people are already out of their homes across the province, with hundreds more on evacuation alert. BC's Wildfire Service is currently handling almost 331 wildfires. About 50 of them sparked up in just the last 24 hours alone.
Government has noted that we expect this to be nationally the worst fire season in 100 years, and we don't expect that British Columbia will be the exception to that rule, given where we are right now.
The Premier adds that while the fire season is far from over, the province has already spent $200 million this year on wildfire efforts. Well, tonight we are hearing from farmers and experts gearing up for an especially dry stretch of weather ahead. This comes with the province warning of severe drought, and July has barely begun. Susanna De Silva has more on the preparations and the concern.
A walk through Vancouver is looking quite brown these days.
Dry, dead, sad.
Ponds that used to be supplemented with city water are already dried up in an effort to save a resource the province is warning is in increasingly short supply.
We have not experienced this level of widespread drought across the province this early in the year in recent memory.
Much of the province is in stage 4 drought level conditions seen in red, described as likely to have adverse impacts on the environment and the economy. There's only one stage more extreme.
Consider taking shorter showers. Only do full loads of dishes and laundry.
In most of BC, we've had some of the driest 15 months in a row that we've seen.
Unlike last October, Metro Vancouver's reservoirs are at normal levels for this time of year, but the district says that might not last as demand has been much higher than usual, an even bigger problem for parts of the province that rely on groundwater.
We've been very non-conservative in how we use water. We tend to think, at least in coastal BC, we tend to think, water, yeah, it's a rainforest. We have so much water. But it's also true that we really go through these really pronounced seasonal cycles, and those are going to potentially get more pronounced.
This year's conditions are already hitting BC's agriculture industry.
If we just take cattle, for example, we're hearing reports of maybe a 50 to 75% reduction from previous years in terms of the amount of hay produced.
It's defeating for sure. We work really hard to get the crops in the ground in a timely way and get it done right. And it's farming, so it's weather, but it's been a few years of some pretty extreme weather events, and so it definitely takes a toll on people.
The province will be providing more details later this week, including the possibility of new water restrictions. Susanna De Silva, CBC News, Vancouver.
We thought we'd take a deeper dive into why the province issued its bleak warning. A look at the current fire situation explains it. Already, the province is near the highest number of square kilometers burned in 1 year, with the worst 4 years all happening in the last decade. And that record will likely be broken next week. Most fires so far have been in the Prince George fire region in the northern half of the province. And by comparison, in 2021, the biggest regions for fire activity were further south. And for more on why the current conditions are so worrying for drought and wildfire, our Justin McElroy spoke to our new science and climate specialist, Darius Madavi, earlier today. Take a listen.
During the wintertime, when people were talking about what could be forecast for this year, El Nino was raised as part of the factors that we would have to consider. Is this what we're seeing here?
It's a great question, and I think this is something that's going to be coming up a lot over the next couple months as we see, typically drier, hotter conditions, which is what we're forecasted to have. And those are conditions that are associated with El Nino. We talk a lot about how El Nino typically brings hotter years. El Nino has just started. The World Meteorological Organization just said that we're in El Nino last week. So we really haven't had time for it to ramp up and start to affect our local climate here in BC.
Good, so we still got time to ramp up with the fun times, right?
Yeah, Environment Canada has forecasted that we're going to see hotter conditions than usual throughout northern BC, much of the interior. Very likely to see that here on the south coast as well. And throughout the entire south coast and up into the central coast, we're likely going to see a drier season than usual, which is what we've seen already, right? May was our hottest May on record for all of BC, and we had our longest dry stretch on record here at YVR.
And we're not going to get relief. So what impacts does that mean for just folks in these communities, particularly if they do stuff in ranching and agriculture, of what they're looking at and what could be on the table come August and September?
I mean, agriculture requires a ton of water, and it's not looking like we're just going to have those reserves. So I know that a lot of people are worried about what they're looking towards over the next couple months. What we're really hoping for is some sustained moderate levels of rainfall Again, we don't want those extreme rainfall events because when the ground is so dried out, it just sort of washes over. It doesn't get absorbed, and that doesn't alleviate our fire risk. It doesn't bring our drought levels down. We need sustained rainfall, so that's what we're hoping for. It's possible over the next couple months. That'll be what brings people relief. But
it has to be the right type of rain.
Exactly. Yeah, we need these long, sustained rainfall events, not torrential downpours.
And from droughts to flooding, the province is putting forward new funding to help communities better prepare for climate-related disasters. More than $44 million will be handed out, including nearly $2 million alone for Grand Forks. In 2018, thousands of residents were flooded out of their homes after the Kettle River overflowed its banks. The new money will help with flood mitigation for that city, including natural assets like wetlands. An American with a high degree of backcountry experience has died after falling while hiking in the Black Tusk area near Whistler. Police say Nicole Killian of Richmond, Vermont, died when she fell from the chimney portion of the climb. They say the area is very technical and a challenge for even the most skilled adventurer. Killian was a member of Vermont's search and rescue team. Her death is being investigated by the RCMP, BC Coroner, and BC Parks. Charges have been laid against the driver accused of killing 2 teenagers last July. 27-year-old Corey Brown is now charged with 2 counts of criminal negligence causing death, 1 count of driving while disqualified, and 1 count of flight from police. The crash killed Samir Ali and Yasbira Tabtamu. The 2 were driving home from soccer practice near the Burnaby-New Westminster border when the crash happened. They died shortly after. Metro Vancouver Transit Police say Brown was taking off from a traffic stop. He remains in custody and is expected to return to court later this month. Well, police have identified the man shot dead in a Surrey alleyway over the weekend. 29-year-old Pavan Paul Manon was found unresponsive in the driver's seat of an SUV Sunday night. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators found a burned-out vehicle nearby, which they say indicates a targeted killing. Officers are now looking for witnesses and video footage for the investigation. Police province-wide are warning about the rise of 3D printed guns that often look like harmless toys. The Combined Forces Special Enforcement Unit says although a fully functional firearm cannot be printed, conversion kits that complete 3D guns can be bought in stores and online. It says anyone with a 3D printer for their kids or for schools perhaps should be aware of these risks. The unit is also warning about the growing phenomenon of ghost guns, which are privately made firearms. And to the Okanagan now, 5 more lawsuits have been filed against a developer and construction company over a crane collapse that killed 5 people in Kelowna 2 years ago. The people behind the lawsuits include a victim's colleagues and a nearby business owner. All of them claim the crane crashed down because the Mission Group and Stemmer Construction were negligent. Neither the developer nor the construction company have responded to those claims. Surrey Mayor Brenda Locke insists that Surrey's RCMP restaffing plan is going well. The RCMP's progress report says 81 Surrey police officers have indicated they will rejoin the force from the Surrey Police Service if it shuts down, and that 15 of them are already in the hiring process. The SPS, meanwhile, says Locke's numbers are inflated. The mayor announced council's decision to keep the RCMP last month, even though the province recommended it continue transitioning to an independent Surrey Police Service. The province is expected to make a final decision sometime next week. Ottawa has announced plans to ease pathways for Hong Kongers to become permanent residents in Canada. Those who work in Canada for at least 1 year will now be eligible. As John Hernandez reports, recent arrivals say the country is becoming an increasingly desirable destination amid a mounting exodus from Hong Kong.
Christopher Un is still settling into Vancouver, but the former Hong Kong resident says there's a growing community here that's harder to find back home.
The sense of belonging of being a Hong Konger is gradually diminishing. In terms of education and the way of life,
Mainland China's tightening grip over Hong Kong, which has sparked sweeping protests over the past few years, has led to a growing wave of immigration from the region, with many setting their sights on Canada. On Tuesday, Ottawa announced plans to make it easier for them to become permanent residents here by removing a Canadian post-secondary degree requirement if they've worked here for 1 year.
Removing this requirement means more Hong Kongers who have worked in Canada will be eligible for permanent residency, easing the transition to permanent status.
While Ng still plans on finishing his schooling at UBC, he says the new policy makes Canada an even more appealing option for his friends and family back home.
It's also opening another door for people in my age to consider Canada as an option other than the UK and Australia, and it's definitely the easier way.
A policy that could add momentum that's been building in places like Vancouver, Toronto, and Calgary. 2021 census figures showed a 6.1% increase of Hong Kong-born people in Metro Vancouver over 5 years, bringing the total population to more than 76,000, a community that's only grown and strengthened its bonds in the years since.
The parents groups formed, the student groups formed, and even barbecue, sharing different living experiences. So I think this is a new environment.
Ottawa says the updated policy will ultimately help fill gaps in Canada's labour market. It goes into effect August 15th and will run through 2025. John Hernandez, CBC News, Vancouver.
The one that I remember the most has to be Back to the Future.
Traveling back in time like Marty McFly, the Vancouver Film Festival is taking us back to the 80s this summer. More on that after the break. Stay with us. Thank you for staying with us during our commercial-free live stream. Well, gardeners in BC Southeast celebrated a milestone this past weekend. The Cranbrook Garden Club marked 25 years of its open day event. And as Corey Bullock tells us, it's a long-standing tradition to share knowledge and nature.
So this is my perennial border, and I have an awful lot of plants.
25 years ago, Jenny Humphrey began Open Garden Day in Cranbrook with a group of other gardeners.
It began with like 26 people, and we used to meet in the little library that doesn't exist anymore.
Since then, the Cranbrook Garden Club has grown to more than 300 members.
I love talking to other gardeners. It's always rewarding. But in gardening, you're really your own critic for a lot of the time. So it's really lovely to have people come and say, how did you do this? Or I'm not sure I'd do it that way. I would do it this way. Or what's that plant?
Humphrey's garden is one of 6 on display this year, along with Doug Lowe's.
Truly amazing. Love them. Just love them. It's important for people to take some pride in what they have and show it off.
Each garden is different and unique. Hosts prepare for months, sometimes years, for the event.
It is nerve-wracking a bit for the hosts, but it's also very, very rewarding.
Cranbrook's public produce garden is also on display for the first time since it opened back in 2012.
It promotes the garden, but more than that, hopefully it encourages, inspires, informs people.
There are many benefits that come from gardening, from providing pollination for the bees to feeding the community, and both physical and mental health.
It really does help people reconnect to nature, to the ground, and that's why we talk about growing food, growing gardeners, and growing community, because community is mental health.
And other gardeners, like Humphrey, agree.
It's a huge escape, and there's nothing like getting your fingers in the dirt.
Cranbrook's Open Garden Day runs from 10 to 3:30 on Sunday, July 9th. Corey Bullock, CBC News, Cranbrook.
Well, welcome back. COVID has not gone away, and neither has the advice to get vaccinated. Now, Canada's immunization panel is recommending a COVID-19 booster shot this fall. It says there's a new vaccine formulation targeting more recent variants. The booster is recommended as long as 6 months have passed since a previous COVID vaccine or infection. The committee says immunization is particularly important for those at increased risk of infection. To entertainment now, and BC film buffs have a chance to revisit some of Hollywood's biggest blockbusters by going back to the 80s. The Vancouver International Film Festival is in the midst of summer programming, showcasing more than 60 films from that decade and hosting a series of talks on everything from film soundtracks to lighting. We asked some locals what their favorite 80s movies are.
The one that I remember the most has to be Back to the Future. I remember being a kid and watching it. I wasn't a child of the 80s, but watching it later when I was a kid and being really fascinated. I think that was my first time thinking about time travel.
For example, since I was a child, one of my favorites.
Maybe the Raiders of the Lost Ark was another one is coming out.
Yeah.
But that came out, I think, in the 80s. Maybe that was the best movie of the 80s.
These films and more are screening now until August 31st at the VIF Centre. You are looking at a live shot of a still quiet Port of Vancouver. Seasonal weather for the south coast, much more extreme weather in the interior and the north. We'll see what that means for the volatile wildfire situation with your full forecast next.
In the heart of Vancouver's business district, an armored car draws up.
Something for someone who has everything.
It is an event. Yet another event dreamed up by Lions owner and promoter extraordinaire Murray Peasant.
You gotta watch it. I don't want anyone tampering with it. Now this will be opened before the game on Thursday. Folks, it's a surprise. It really is. No hints.
Whatever is in the box is a gift for Toronto Argonauts owner Bruce McNall.
Mr. McNall will be in a state of shock once he receives this.
Whether we like it or not, is we're trying to sell the sport all around the world, basically.
McNall is a multimillionaire. In the off-season, he and hockey star Wayne Gretzky and comedian John Candy purchased the Argonauts. Then they signed the biggest star in American college football, Rakib Ismail.
You can't be an athlete. I mean, this is probably one of the shortest lived careers, other than being an actor or something.
His contract was touted as being worth $26 million.
Actually said 26. 26 million. Kind of joked on it a bit. But it's worth it. It's worth it. There's still good seats available. Please come down.
And that's a problem. There are still lots of tickets available and teams in trouble. The Calgary Stampeders have been having trouble even making the interest payments on their debts. And last week, the Ottawa Rough Riders Board of Directors quit. The team was $2.5 million in the hole. Other owners say big changes have to be made.
If we're going to survive, and if this league has to go, we might have to change. We might have to make some real changes. We might not call it the CFL. We'll call it maybe something else. I mean, it's just changing a letter in the alphabet. If it helps save the game and it helps save those cities with teams, so be it.
This league needs decisions, not 4 weeks from today, but today.
Peasant wants to see publicly owned teams become privately owned.
Got to give the public what the public wants, not what we want. This is something. Never try to sell the public blue ties if they want to wear red ones.
And what are they wanting this year?
They want excitement. They want to see a competitive league. They want to know the league is going to stay in existence, which it will for sure. And I think they'd love to see it expanded.
And expansion means teams in the States, where the television revenue could save the league.
Naturally, there's some things to clean up here first. They've got to get done. But certainly the interest is down in the States, and I'm sure it will go down there.
But that's not likely to happen this year, and to keep the league afloat, promoters like Candy and Pesum will have to hustle to fill the local stadiums.
So one of my fondest dreams was to see this stadium jam-packed with 60,000 people.
A booming punt.
Paul Heaney, CBC News, Vancouver.
We're sharing really important information with the public, and I feel like this is exactly what our job is, especially as the public broadcaster, especially in morning radio. That's incredibly important.
Land Back is a CBC original podcast where we uncover land theft in Canada and look at how Indigenous people are taking it all back. Land Back is out now on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
CBC Vancouver is the premier media partner of the 2023 Surrey Fusion Festival, July 22nd and 23rd. Visit the festive cultural pavilions, enjoy free live music and family activities, and make sure you drop by the CBC tent for your chance to win CBC swag. And the Herb Original is a new CBC British Columbia podcast. Stream it today on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts.
The weather update is brought to you by Direct Buy Furnace, installing the most reliable heating and cooling brand. It's hard to stop a train.
And time to take a look at the forecast, and we would like to introduce to you for the first time on this show, Darius Madavi. Welcome to the show, Darius.
Hi,
He'll be filling in for Johanna Wagstaff as she's off. So we'll get right to it. It looks like the wildfire danger is still top of mind looking at the forecast ahead.
Yes, happy to be here. Wish I had a happier forecast for the first one. But if you look at the map behind me, we're seeing a lot of red. Anywhere you see a red dot here, that's an out-of-control wildfire. If you see a fire icon, that's a wildfire of note. So maybe it's close to a community, maybe it's particularly large, just some special risk associated with it. But what's really notable is if I had showed you this map just late last week, it would have looked nothing like this. Would have been much cleaner, a lot fewer dots. And that's because over the weekend, we saw over 23,000 lightning strikes across the province. And that's just started a whole swath of new fires. We saw just under 100 active fires at the end of last week. Now we're looking at over 300. Some good news. This is earlier today. You can see we did have some more lightning strikes going through the province. Fortunately, mostly concentrated in the northeast, a little bit in the central and south interior, but nothing like we were seeing yesterday when they were just blanketing the province. And some more good news, it's looking like that'll be the same story tomorrow. Really only a chance of some thunder showers in the easternmost parts of the province. And even then, again, there's no active weather systems moving through the province. Those are just convective storms. So into the late afternoon, as the weather really starts to heat up, we might see some atmospheric instability, bringing those showers, bringing those thunderstorms. But it's a much lower risk than we've been seeing earlier this week. And really sunny morning across the province, low risk in the eastern parts. And then this is just a morning drizzle possible in Tofino, but really nothing like the extreme weather we were seeing across the interior yesterday and over the weekend. Now, if we go into Vancouver, similar story we've been seeing the last couple days. Wednesday, we're going to see some marine cloud in the morning, the same thing bringing possible drizzles to Tofino. That clears out on Thursday, and then we see temperatures come back up a few degrees above seasonal Friday, Saturday, Sunday for a really nice weekend. Also a few degrees above seasonal inland, so looking at around 30. And then Monday and Tuesday next week, temperatures come back down around seasonal. Chance of some rain Tuesday, possibly, but fingers crossed we could really use it.
You bet. Thank you so much, Darius. A classic July forecast there. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
And that is your late news for this Tuesday. For news anytime, head to cbc.ca/BC. Your next local news is on the early edition. That's on CBC Radio 1 starting tomorrow morning at 5:30. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a great night.